today. We're honored to host two experts on this topic. We have Emily Freeman, a mission counselor, homeschool liaison from Palm Beach Atlantic University, and Mary Smith, Senior Associate Director of Admissions at Gettysburg College. She's also the president of Pennsylvania Association for College Admission Counseling. So on behalf of the Navigate 2020 event sponsor, Go to College Fairs, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our panelists. And thank you so much again for taking the time to present on this important topic. Let's begin.
Thank you, Scott. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to get to chat with you all. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen really quickly so that you can see a little bit more information while we're talking through different topics. So give me one moment to do that. Okay, so you all should be able to see that clearly. So as Scott mentioned, my name is Emily Freeman. I am one of our admission counselors for Palm Beach Atlantic University. I'm also our homeschool liaison. I myself was actually a homeschool student from 5th grade up until graduating and starting at Palm Beach Atlantic, where I did my undergraduate degree. I'm currently pursuing my MBA and am an admission counselor here. So I'm really excited to get to talk with you all today about the college admission process, both from what I did growing up as a homeschool student, and then also from the perspective of now being on the other side of things with the admission counselor side of things.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're hailing us from. My name is Mary Smith. I'm one of the Senior Associate Directors from the Admissions Office at Gettysburg College. I am also the president of our state association, the Pennsylvania Association for College Admission Counseling. So we work with secondary school counselors, other admissions professionals from across the state of Pennsylvania. My background, I also went to Gettysburg College, so I went to my alma mater. I graduated in 2000 and have not left yet. So I have been at Gettysburg for now 20 years and have been doing a lot of reading of applications over the years. So I'm excited to talk to you about this whole college search process. What we thought we would do is to give you a context of where both of us are coming from, both Emily and I. We thought we would introduce our schools to you just in a few 30 seconds, if you will, so you have a context of where we're coming from. So as I mentioned, I've been at Gettysburg now 24 years, if you include my student years, and Gettysburg is a college of the liberal arts and sciences. We are located in, yes, that world famous town of Gettysburg. Very well known for changing the course of our nation's history, so that is the same place. We are about an hour and a half north of Washington, D.C., about 45 minutes from our state capital, to kind of give you a sense of where we are, with students from all over the globe. So we have students representing 40 states and 40 foreign countries who do, frankly, just about everything. They do the sciences, they do math, they do music, they do the fine and performing arts, they do history. Poli-sci is actually one of our top majors, being so close to Washington. So we cover a lot of ground. But that's a little bit about Gettysburg. And I should mention lastly that we read very holistically. And when I say holistically, what that means is we read everything in your application. So that's kind of the context of where we're coming from.
And then to give you a little bit of background about Palm Beach Atlantic, we are a private Christ First University in downtown West Palm Beach, Florida. So right on the southeast coast of Florida. All those little tan buildings in the bottom left-hand corner, that's actually our campus. So we are directly on the Intercoastal Waterway and just 1 mile from the beach. So definitely a nice location. It's typically about 85 degrees here and definitely great for that. But there are so many other awesome aspects about PBA. The average class size is about 17 students, so you're really getting that hands-on teaching in the classroom. It's a really good next step, especially for homeschool students and just across the board as well, because you're getting that really personalized attention and you get to know your professors very well. It's a close-knit environment. It's a very family-oriented campus, and it's definitely common for students to see familiar faces around campus, for professors to invite students over to their homes for dinner or for breakfast and just continue getting to know them in that way. We have over 50 different majors. There's a wide variety of different opportunities. Some of our top majors are probably marine biology, business, ministry, and education as well. But we are very strong on internships and field experience opportunities. We want to get students involved in their field before they graduate. So we have a program called DIVE, that stands for Discovering Internships as Vocational Exploration, where we connect students to internships early on. And that's where you'll see, like, we're right in downtown, so you can walk to so many different internship opportunities and they're right in your backyard. And we'll definitely get to talk a little bit more about scholarship opportunities and that kind of thing as well, but there's definitely a lot of opportunities to make this university affordable and have great options there. but I know that you all have a lot of questions and want a lot of information. So let's get started there. So we're going to first begin with the college search process, the college preparation process. Later on, we'll talk a little bit more about financial aid and affordability and that kind of thing. The way that we're structuring this, we're kind of going through each year, each timeline. But before we want to jump into that, we want to get to know you guys better. And we want to give you all a little bit of time to have interaction and not just feel like you're being talked at. So Scott, if you wouldn't mind helping us get started with the first poll question, that would be great. So you all should be able to see a poll now. So what these will be is, first off, what is your educational background? Just to kind of get a gauge for how much of our audience is homeschool student, private high school, public high school student, and then also what grade are you in? We're going to talk about different steps for 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, but this helps give us a little bit more context and helps you get to know each other a little bit as well.
Yep, so we're getting some good responses here.
So when we share it, you're going to see one aspect highlighted as the correct answer. They make us select the correct answer. There's not a correct answer for any of these. It just helps us get to know you all better.
Looks like we've got about over 600 responses here. So I think we've got a good source here. I'm going to go ahead and end polling and post up the results.
Okay. Okay, so great. So you all can kind of see each other's background a little bit. So we have a majority from public high school, but a good amount from private high school and homeschool students as well. And majority of our juniors, so that's great. We're definitely going to talk a lot about how you can prepare as a student in 11th grade and also talk about how COVID-19 will affect that process. Same for 10th and 9th graders as well. And 12th graders, some final steps for you guys to be thinking through as well. So that'll be really good. Well, let's get this started with our sophomores. So for those of you who are sophomores, and if you know some of you said you were 9th grade or maybe coming up to high school pretty soon, this will give you some good ideas of things to keep in mind and things to have in the back of your head while you're preparing. So if you aren't sure what you want to do, that is totally normal. And I am not saying you have to make up your mind today, have a full college career decision. But I think it's helpful to start researching some academic programs and just see what are you interested in? What are you maybe not as interested in? I know from my background, I knew the sciences were not for me. That was not the route I was pursuing. But even saying, okay, that's not the route for me, maybe I'll look more into business, education, politics. You're narrowing down your aspects that you're looking into, and that can be helpful when you're looking at what schools you're considering, what programs they offer, that kind of thing. Also, begin researching what college options are available and what's important to you. College is definitely a personal decision, and there are aspects that are going to be more important to you than are important to another student. So definitely helpful things to keep in mind. And we'll talk more about what are some potential options to look into. But for instance, if there's a certain state that you want to live in, for me, that was Florida. That narrows your search down quite a bit. If you're looking for a larger school versus a smaller school, that'll also narrow down your search a little bit as well, for instance. Now, we've mentioned engage in SAT, ACT, and CLT test prep. CLT may be one that you aren't as familiar with. That is called the Classic Learning Test. Some schools accept that, other ones don't. That's one that just keep in mind. It is sometimes popular with the homeschool students, so that's why we wanted to mention it. And it's one that PBA does accept. A lot of those private Christian schools do accept that as well. But it's an odd time right now, as you all know, with COVID-19. So schools are making adjustments and are adapting. Some schools have said they're test optional just for the fall semester due to SAT, ACT being canceled for April and June. Other schools have made the decision to say we're test optional for the next 3 years. Other schools are already test optional. So that's something that I would check into the different schools you're looking into and see where they stand on that. If you are considering schools that historically have required SAT, ACT, I probably would recommend doing some prep anyway, just because we have to believe that this is not going to last forever and that we're going to get back to normalcy soon. So I would probably say keep looking into that. But if there's schools that you're interested in that have already made those judgment calls and said, you know, that's not the route we're pursuing for the next 3 years or have historically been test optional, that's something that you know, and that's something that you're able to keep in consideration. So that one has a little bit of nuance for what's going on right now. But most importantly, study hard and do well and enjoy where you're at. High school is a really special time. So it's important to be future seeking and be thinking about college options and the next steps. But I really want you to remember that this is a special time and get to enjoy that time as well. Let's talk a little bit more about those different aspects that might be important to you.
And I think I'm an official, complete fan of that last point of doing well academically. I think there's so much angst in sophomore and junior year to get everything right in that moment. And really, it's about figuring out what are the things you want and what are your priorities. So as you're starting, whether you're a junior, the 24% of the group who are our sophomores actually, or the 65% of our group who are the juniors starting their process, there's a lot to think about and a lot to consider. Emily mentioned distance and location was important to her. So how far from home? Do you want to stay within a certain radius? Do you want to go way far away from home? Do you want to go overseas? Are we talking smaller, medium, large? What does that even mean? What majors are offered? You know, it's interesting when I interact with a lot of students starting out their process, one of the first questions I get is, what majors does Gettysburg offer? And then when I interview graduating seniors and ask them about their experience at Gettysburg, one of the things they often don't talk about is their majors. They will often talk about their experiences. They will often talk about their faculty. They will often talk about what they did within those majors. But it's interesting to see how those things shift. So it's thinking about what you're interested in studying, but also recognizing that that may change and being open to possibilities. Do you want to live on campus or not? What are some of the things you're thinking about in terms of the cost and academic and social fit? And what we mean by that is every school is going to have a little bit different of a profile. What are their averages for SAT and ACTs? More importantly, what are their averages in terms of their transcripts? A's and B's, what do they look at? What are some of the expectations in terms of the academics? And where do you fit within that? That's going to be important as you're starting to, in your junior year, starting to figure out where am I going to apply. And yes, definitely cost needs to factor in there, but don't necessarily rule a school out based on the sticker price, because oftentimes the most expensive looking option might be your most affordable option because of financial aid and availability for scholarships. As we move into this next slide, we get to focus on our juniors. So juniors, you're continuing to do the same thing. You're looking into programs, you're creating lots of lists of questions. I think this is the neat part. Right now, in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, there are so many more virtual opportunities to get to know colleges than there have ever been. When I was in many of your shoes, we didn't really even use the internet. So now the ability to hop on an information session with one college and then hop on another information session with another college is right at your fingertips and can be done within the same few hours. And you can start to hear what other people are asking. What are the primary questions? What should I be thinking about? Because as you listen to other people's questions, you'll start to formulate other lists that you're thinking, oh, well, that's a great question. I think I'll add that one to my list. And then visiting your top college, visiting many different colleges. We talked about juniors looking at all different types of options, location, size, all these different things. Until you really explore what that means. I remember a student visiting Gettysburg one time, she goes, wow, Gettysburg's a lot bigger than I thought. And it was because she thought 2,600, well, that's similar to my high school size. Okay, but when she got on campus and it was 225 acres, she went, whoa, okay, this is not what I expected. So getting on your campuses when you can, and now virtually, it gives you such a neat opportunity to really, as my mom used to say, kick the tires, get to know the institution, get to know the people a bit.
I think there's something really unique about this time that we can see almost a benefit to being virtual, where you have kind of like you mentioned, the ability to talk to these colleges at your fingertips. You almost have the ability to visit all these colleges at your fingertips. There are so many virtual events similar to this college fair that you can meet with admission counselors, meet with professors, meet with current students, all virtually. So take advantage of that and allow yourself to virtually visit these schools during this time where you might have a little bit more free time than you typically would.
And I'll just add, especially as Emily had brought up the SAT, ACT, and the changes, so I mentioned I'm part of PACAC, the Pennsylvania Association, which is part of a larger umbrella association called NACAC, the National Association. I happened to glance in one of your questions. How do you find out if schools have gone test optional? NACAC, which NACACnet.org is their email address. NACAC, N-A-C-A-C, net, N-E-T.org, actually has a running list of colleges and universities and what they've done. So for my seniors who are on this Zoom, if you are wondering, did they extend their deadline? What's going on at that college from a senior perspective, you can hop on there and actually see all of the different updates. You can also see what schools have decided to not only go test optional period. I mean, we've been test optional for over 10 years, so it's simply a part of who we are, but who's choosing to go test optional for 2 years or 3 years in the wake of everything COVID-19. So that is a great resource to tap into if you're curious what other schools are doing and you want to go to one place as opposed to every school's website, which you can also do. That's definitely where the latest and greatest information is, and that's on every school's website.
Really quickly on dual enrollment, that's definitely not a required next step for all students, but it's one that a lot of students tend to take as a next step. So I did want to just kind of touch on that. I think when you're thinking about dual enrollment, thinking about the reasoning behind it and what your goals are with that. If your goal is to get some experience in a college setting and take a couple classes so you're prepared for that, okay, great. So that's one thing you keep in mind. If you're looking to get your AA degree prior to going to a 4-year university, trying to cut down on the time, okay, that's a great goal too. But definitely looking and seeing how those will transfer to a university is something that's important to think about. Also, skimming your poll questions, I saw one of you asked about if there is a limit for the different dual enrollment that you're taking prior to going to college. Now, that depends on the school. Some schools may allow you to be considered a freshman student for scholarships, which typically they have higher scholarship opportunities for a freshman versus a transfer student if you have your AA. Other schools may mark you as a transfer student if you come in with your AA. So that's something to think about and keep in mind. Also, while you're thinking about these different majors, it's helpful to see what classes are required for those majors, because you don't want to necessarily be taking a class that you then find out maybe you didn't need that option. I know for PBA, for instance, our honors program is pretty unique. So it actually would replace your general education requirement, and it's a classical style of learning. So you're doing the Socratic method. It's very discussion based, but we have students who may do an English composition class, pursue the honors program for the learning environment and the scholarship, and it doesn't count directly toward how they wanted it to. So that's something else to look at if you're thinking about honors programs and that kind of thing as well. So definitely continue looking at the different schools you're thinking about with regards to dual enrollment.
And I'll mention 2 things as I caught it in the chat box. The website that I saw a few didn't catch the website name, NACAC net, N-E-T.org, NACACnet.org. And do you want to explain just briefly, when you say dual enrollment, Emily, what dual enrollment means?
Yeah, so dual enrollment, I was referring to if you are doing college credit either through your high school that it's offering through a specific college or doing it on the college campus, but similar to that is AP credits, CLEP credits, that kind of thing as well, more of those test-based exams to get college credit. So those are a little bit different than dual enrollment, but I think they follow the same principles as well.
So someone asked the question, what questions do we ask? That's a great question. We've got a slide for you. So there's a lot of questions to be considered as you start this process. I mentioned kind of school profile. When I say school profile, what does that even mean? Every school is going to be a little bit different in their expectations from a transcript perspective and what they're looking for in your grades, in your testing, in the nature of your curriculum. And that could be, you know, some schools offer advanced placement courses. Some schools offer international baccalaureate coursework. Some schools offer the dual enrollment. So every one of your high schools and homeschool experiences are a little bit different. So it's our job as admissions officers to get to know it in the context of your school, but also for you to get to know us in the context of what are the expectations.
And a lot of those questions also, I've seen a couple questions in there about internships and involvement at different colleges. That's very similar to the career placement services, seeing what different career placement service options are available at the university. Do they have a career fair that happens at their school? Do they bring different organizations on campus? Where is the school located for the different opportunities and that kind of thing? And looking at student body, kind of going back to larger school versus smaller school and what type of fit that you're interested in. And I think even all of you would probably argue, those of you who are in public school, private school, that all of your schools have a little bit different personalities. sure you have rivals that are a little bit different than who you are and that kind of thing. And colleges are like that as well. There's different personalities and different types and different student body and that kind of thing. So it's good to even ask other students or ask alumni what the environment's like and what the community is like there.
I always say do two things when you visit a college campus. Unfortunately, one of those things you can't do as well virtually. One of those things is eat in the dining hall. And the reason being is, A, you want to sample the food and where you're going to be eating for your 4 years, perhaps, or 2 years, depending on the program. But also it gives you a really good idea of the environment of that campus, the student body, what life is like, eat in the dining hall. And the other big thing is check out the Career Center. Because what is the point of your college education but to learn, to grow, and eventually to get a great job and be set upon a great career path. So if that school is not providing you with those career options, you might want to think again. So those are two big things I always say when you step foot on a college campus or are looking at it virtually.
So for our seniors, I know a couple of you in the chat and even in our poll question said that you're a current senior. So congratulations on being almost done. That is so exciting. So your first step, if you haven't already, would be to apply. At many schools, it's not too late, even for my class of 2020. You can definitely still look into applying and still continue that process. I know that's how PBA is. You can still continue that process, but many schools across the country are like that. And there are a variety of different application processes, which Mary's going to talk about in a moment as well. So stay tuned for that. So if you are a rising senior, there are some that have specific deadlines and have specific processes and that kind of thing. For instance, some schools are on the Common App. Many schools are on the Common App, but other schools are not. Some schools are, you have to apply directly to their website. So there's a lot of nuances and variety across the board for different schools. And we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that. But for my seniors, I really encourage you attend orientation or attend an accepted student day event. Many of those are happening virtually. Some are being scheduled to be happening on campus later in the summer as well. So if you haven't been to a campus yet and they're offering that opportunity, that's a great way to get to tour the campus and experience it a little bit more. But either way, it's a great way to get connected with your student body right away and meet other students virtually or in person who will be your classmates, your peers, very soon, and just a better way to continue to get to know the campus environment and the faculty and staff. But I really encourage you to get to know your admission counselor. We are there to be in your corner and to help you and to give you resources. And it's something that I really didn't realize when I was going through the process, just how much knowledge and information that they have, where if you're looking at a specific school, they might know a program that is a good fit for you that you don't even know exists. Or they may know of a scholarship opportunity for you that you weren't aware of. So they are your best resource to help continue getting to know the process better. It doesn't have to be that you only talk to them when you're ready to make that decision, although they love those calls as well, but just to continue learning about the university and seeing if it's a good fit for you. It's a good way to continue learning throughout the process. Financial aid opportunities and financial aid process is definitely something that's probably heavy on your minds right now with regards to next steps and rising seniors and current seniors. So we're going to go in depth to that and to college affordability. But before we do that, I want to let Mary go through a couple college application processes and that kind of thing.
So for juniors, as you're quickly approaching the application process, usually those go live somewhere over the summer. Oftentimes, I know the Common Application, for example, goes live August 1. Most of your schools are going to start going live with their applications in August and September. And you can apply at any point in time after that. But there's all different types of admissions processes. There are restrictive and non-restrictive. The easy one is the non-restrictive. These are open options that mean you can apply anywhere. There's no limit on how many schools you can apply to and where you can apply to. They're completely non-restrictive. Open admission means that it's completely open. It doesn't matter if it's October, November, January, May. That school is accepting applications year-round and admitting students year-round. So that is an open application. Oftentimes your open applications are your community colleges. A rolling admission school is one like PBA that is as students make their, as students apply, the college or university will make its decisions. It will roll out those decisions. You can't see me, but I'm rolling my hands. I'm very hands-on in terms of my action items here. Regular decision means the school has a set deadline. It has one deadline, usually somewhere in January, January 1, January 15th, and it doesn't matter If you've applied August 1, October 1, or January 1, you get the same consideration, because what that school, oftentimes your highly selective schools, will need to see the entire pool of applicants. They're looking at everyone in the process at that time and then making those decisions, because they're really shaping the class. That's regular decision. Gettysburg is a regular decision school. Early action is one of those early programs where you can apply early and find out early, but you don't have to make a commitment yet. You have all the way up until that May 1 deadline, where this year, a little later, as a lot of schools have extended their deadlines, you have that complete time to make a decision. And I'll throw one more out there that's not on this list, and that's high priority. Let's say a school says, we have a priority deadline. Doesn't mean you have to apply by then, but chances are they could fill their class. So if a school says we have a priority deadline, apply by that priority deadline. And then those two restrictive pieces, restrictive early action are usually your Ivy League schools, where you're allowed to apply early action and not have to commit, but you can only apply to one of them. And early decision is binding. Early decision, this is the school you've fallen in love with. This is where you know you want to go, because if you apply under early decision, you are making a commitment to that school. And then in turn, if they admit you, you're making that commitment to come, with some caveats and exceptions for financial aid. So early decision is the binding, if you will. With that being said, we actually have another poll question that kind of leads into what we look for in the application process. So Scott, if you could pull up our third poll question. So what factors do most colleges not consider in reviewing your application? So there's a bunch of different choices here. What don't we look at? We'll give you a minute or two or less.
And while you're looking at that, I saw a couple questions just asking for clarification on what I meant when I said admission counselor, which is an awesome question. So there are guidance counselors that you all have in your high schools, most times, and admission counselors at your colleges. I was referring to admission counselors at the colleges and universities that you're applying to. You are definitely assigned an admission counselor once you're applying through the application process, but many times you have one and don't even realize it, even before the admission process. Your guidance counselor, though, is a huge resource as well. And we're going to talk about especially how they can help you even with scholarships and that kind of thing in a little bit. But if you aren't sure of your admission counselor or who that would be at the university that you're interested in, that's okay. I would probably even just request information on their website, or if they're at the college fair for this virtual college fair, you can even chat them during that and you'll get to know people and they can put you in contact with the appropriate person that way.
And the nice part about that admissions counselor is oftentimes they will be your advocate.
Mm-hmm.
So you visit a school, ask for who that representative is of your location, of your area, because oftentimes they might be the one going to bat for you in the admissions process. So Scott, do we have an outcome?
We do. We have over 65% have responded. So let me go ahead and share the results.
Okay, good job. You are correct. Most schools are not going to be looking at state-specific tests. We're going to be looking at all the above, and that will carry nicely into our next slide. But oftentimes, certain specific schools and states have specific standardized tests. Most colleges and universities, given the nature of their national review process, are not going to be looking at the requirements of a specific state. I think of New York State as a perfect example that has specific requirements in terms of testing. Most colleges and universities are not going to be looking at that state-specific test. Actually, I see that a lot checked, 18% checked demonstrated interest. It depends on the school. But let's get into that with the next slide. We'll close the poll.
That's okay.
We look to our next slide. Oh, and we seem to have lost Emily.
I am still here. I'm sorry about that. Give me one moment.
But I'll note it. Oh, there we are. Hello.
So sorry about that.
That's okay. If you want to go back one.
Yep.
So in looking at the application itself, there's a lot of different things. And I think as Emily and I were planning out this presentation, we discovered how much our institutions are so different in what we look at in terms of the application process. So obviously every school is going to have some form of application. That's going to kind of be a given. So, and some schools will require an essay or what's also known as a personal statement as a part of that application. Every school is going to need some sort of transcript. So that's your academic record. For any school, it's going to be a little different. We recognize that. As I said earlier, it's up to the job of the admissions officer to make sure they're reading within the context of your school. Some schools rank and some schools don't. More and more schools are leaning away from college ranking. So it's checking in with that college and university. What are they looking at? Homeschooled applications can be a little different depending on the college or university you're applying to. Standardized testing, we talked a lot about that earlier on. It can depend, especially in this year, it can very much depend. Application fees can depend. Oftentimes, if you visit a campus or are able to make connections with various different organizations, there can be fee waivers. Also, there are oftentimes fee waivers if you qualify for fee waivers as they relate to your institution or free and reduced lunch, things along those lines. So you've got a lot of different things going into that application. Emily, do you want to continue with recommendation letters?
Yes, absolutely. So recommendation letters are definitely an important piece when you're looking into different college opportunities. Some schools do require the different recommendation letters, whether that's from your guidance counselor or from a sports team, athletics, that kind of thing. But other schools don't necessarily require that. So that's something that you'll definitely want to keep in mind when you're looking into the application process and different college options and seeing if that's something that is required or not necessarily required throughout the process.
One of the questions that came up in the chat that relates to the essay is that some schools require supplemental essays. That is not usually the primary personal statement or essay. That's not usually that one. The writing supplements will often be specific to the school. And sometimes that school will say, well, how did you hear about us? Or what is it you like about us? Why are you applying to my school? So that can be your writing supplement. Resume, college-specific pieces, there's a lot that can go into the application process. I recommend having a spreadsheet because every school you will find out is a little bit different. The nice part about some of the common forms, like the common application, is that there will be, as it stated, a lot of commonality to those applications. Moving into 12, the application process for homeschool students. Emily, I think you might be outside at the moment. Is that the case?
I'm sorry about that, everyone. We were having a little bit of an issue in our building, so I wanted to get into a different location to get to talk with you all. But yeah, so different application processes for homeschool students. The application process is exactly the same. That's PDA, so there aren't any additional documents or anything like that that would be required as a homeschool student. But other universities, there might be additional documents that are required for you. So for instance, they could require descriptions. That one's definitely really common, is just providing additional documentation for the coursework that you're doing, whether that is listing what and then Mary, I think you can definitely speak a little bit more about just specifics for what might be required as a homeschool student.
Sure. So I know we have about 9% of our group on the Zoom meeting that aren't homeschooled students. That's great. Every school, again, is going to be a little bit different in how they evaluate every student's application, but sometimes they might require a little bit of additional information. Those course descriptions can be so helpful, but also sometimes they'll require an interview, an in-person interview, or in our time period right now, a virtual interview, a Skype interview, a Zoom interview, something along those lines, but something to give us additional information to have an understanding of the context of where you're coming from. But every school is going to be a little bit different with that. And with that being said, we'll actually transition in our last few minutes. I know we're running tight to time with that hot topic of financial aid. So as we move into the financial aid piece, oh, and poor Emily, I am so impressed that you are doing this on the fly.
Sorry about that, everyone. I'm back now officially. I apologize. We had a different type of situation in our building and had to switch rooms for a little bit. So just overviewing the financial aid process to make sure that everyone's on the same page and everyone kind of has general understanding. there are a variety of different types of financial aid, and sometimes that can cover tuition, other times room and board, expenses. Kind of depends on the amount of financial aid and the school and that kind of thing. But it could come in the form of scholarships and grants, and we'll talk about a variety of opportunities there. It could come in the form of loans. It also could be student employment, such as a federal work-study program. And I know someone had asked in the question, what about being an RA or different positions like that on campus? Many times, student leadership positions such as residence life or working in the career development office or that kind of thing can come with a scholarship or a stipend or a paycheck. So those are typically opportunities available at the different universities you're looking into. And there's a variety of different types of financial aid sources and opportunities. So the first one is federal programs. So federal programs we'll definitely talk a lot more in depth about through this. Other opportunities are state programs. So for instance, the state of Florida has a grant for attending a private institution. So that's something that you'll want to look into the different states and see what's available there. Institutional programs, many private universities, I think some people hear private and they think price tag, and that always doesn't necessarily take into consideration scholarships. And there are a lot of scholarship opportunities available. For instance, at PBA, we award an academic scholarship up to $18,000 annually to 97% of our students. So talk with your admission counselor about that. Many universities have a net price calculator or something like that where you can estimate what amount of financial aid you'd be receiving. Outside assistance, such as outside scholarships, can be really helpful, and we'll give you some helpful tips there. And there's also, in some instances, like prepaid tuition programs.
And just like your application process, there's an application process for financial aid. The primary one, of course, is the FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. I dare you to say that 10 times fast. Free Application for Federal Student Aid, the FAFSA. It opens up October 1, and a lot of schools all schools will use the FAFSA if you're applying for need-based financial aid. However, there are also several other different kinds of forms, which we'll get into in the next slide. But the nice part is it does use the 2 years prior tax information. So if you haven't done your taxes yet for this year, that is totally okay. It relies on last year's. So that's really nice because you already have that done. And for the most part, it's electronic, so a lot of things can pull in electronically, which makes it a little bit easier than it had been in the past. Every school is going to be a little bit different in terms of their time frame. So I will say that very important last bullet point, notice school-specific deadlines. If a school says that their application for college is, say, January 1, and that their financial aid deadline is the same date, don't wait to say, oh, I'm going to apply for financial aid until after I've been admitted. You may have lost out. Because what that school could be doing is rolling out its decisions and at the same time giving away all its financial aid dollars. So pay attention to those dates and deadlines. That's probably one of the most important pieces within this entire presentation is your dates and deadlines, because you don't want to lose out on good financial aid because you missed a deadline. And actually we'll conclude with 2 more poll questions after this one. So Scott, if you will pull up our last 2 poll questions. Now we may have lost Scott. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Scott. So these are 2 important things that not everybody thinks about in terms of applying for financial aid, but are very important. The first question, which of the following qualifies the student to be considered independent for financial aid purposes? My mom, when I started this process, she said, well, you're paying for it yourself. And when I started through the college application process, they said, no, we're looking at mom and dad's information. So there's one question. And the other question is, what factor is not considered by FAFSA? We'll give you your 30 seconds there. I'm guessing we have most in, Scott?
We have we just hit the 50%. Yep, so more than half people have answered. So let me go ahead and share that.
Okay. Actually, that's interesting. So question 1, incorrect. So actually, which of the following qualifies the student to be considered independent? The only correct answer there is that the student turns 24. That is the only correct answer, which can be challenging as students are completing the financial aid process perhaps on their own. That's where your admissions officer, your financial aid officer, and your secondary school counselor come in as very, very helpful advisors in this process. And the next question, what factor is not considered by FAFSA? Yep, unfortunately, who is paying for it? It doesn't matter who is actually doing the paying, whether it's you, your parents, your grandparents. That is not considered as a part of the financial aid process. So then moving on to our next slide. So different forms of financial aid that get pulled from the FAFSA information. So federal grants, that's what you want. Grants and scholarships are the ding, ding, ding. Grants and scholarships, you don't have to pay back. Bottom line, grants and scholarships, you don't have to pay back. That is what you want to be looking at from a federal perspective. Sometimes colleges have their own specific, sometimes states have their own specific grants. So grants and scholarships. Federal work study, Emily mentioned that, where you're working a job, but you receive the paycheck. Loan opportunities, all of this is decided because of FAFSA.
And jumping into outside scholarships, this is a resource that is available to you. Sometimes it takes a little bit extra investigation, a little bit extra work on your end just to do those applications, but they're helpful resources that are at your disposal. So just a couple of quick tips to keep in mind. For those of you who are public or private school students, your guidance counselor is the biggest resource for you. And that's an opportunity that I wish I knew more about when I was looking into colleges. Go to their office and ask them about outside scholarship opportunities. They will know a lot of those local scholarships. Just a smaller application pool, as opposed to having everyone across the country applying for this. It's only people from your area. So there's just less people applying, more probability that you'll receive the scholarship. Also, keep in mind, where are you involved? You know what's unique and special to you better than anyone else. So if you're involved in certain organizations, or if you're involved in different aspects, for instance, I was in 4-H when I was in high school, and they did scholarships for students in 4-H specifically. But there's also opportunities if you're in Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts and that kind of thing too. So look into where you're involved and see what opportunities are available. In addition, when you're looking local, my favorite tip that I learned once I was an admission counselor is to Google your county and scholarships, and you'll typically receive like a community foundation, for instance, that you can pull from a huge list of different opportunities and apply for them there. They aren't always that $10,000 scholarship, but 500 here, 1,000 there add up, and it definitely helps to make college affordable. So definitely take a look at that. But we would love to continue the conversation with you. There are a plethora of things we could have continued talking about, and we don't want to continue taking up any more of your time to let you go to the next webinar as well. But we put our contact information there. Please feel free to take a picture of it, send us a chat, let us know. I'll also be at PBA's virtual college fair booth until about 6 o'clock today. So I'll be available that way, and I'm sure Mary will be available throughout the day. And if you have questions, please reach out to either of us. We'd love to continue to chat with you.
And speaking of questions, we have some commonly asked questions, but perhaps in jumping right into those, since so many of you have been so great with your questions online, perhaps, and Scott, I know I'm breaking the rules, but I hope this is okay, that we could jump to some more of your questions as we're going through. And one of the questions that just up to me that relates to our conversations about financial aid is about the FAFSA. Can you apply to more than one school using the FAFSA? Absolutely. International students, can you use the FAFSA? That's an interesting question. Emily, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so for international students, just because it's FAFSA gives more federal aid, you do need to be a US citizen to apply for the FAFSA. But many times there's outside scholarships for international students. Some colleges have scholarships specifically for international students as well. So there are resources available to you. And in addition to that, academic scholarships from the universities, so the ones I mentioned from PDA and many private universities in particular have a lot of scholarship opportunities. Those are not based on just being a US citizen. So you definitely have access to those as an international student as well.
Scott, are there particular ones that jumped out at you as you were watching our chat box?
So I saw one, so they talked about for juniors, do you recommend doing early application? And if so, are there any advantages aid-wise or acceptance-wise?
So for juniors, you actually can't apply till your senior year. You can definitely start the process of the evaluation, of the looking, of the being prepared, but you actually have to apply in your senior year, partly because you have to be a high school graduate or have your GED in order for us to take you at the collegiate level. Please.
I saw another question related to juniors and scholarships and applying for scholarships. That's actually the year that I would recommend looking into outside scholarships, because there actually are some outside scholarships available for students that are juniors to then apply for when you're in, to then be applied when you're in college. So that's a great time to start looking into outside scholarship resources. And then I saw another question about once you're approved for financial aid. So I'm assuming you mean once you finish the FAFSA, how does the university know you're approved? Well, once you list that on their FAFSA and hit save, it's automatically sent to your university. So that's when they'll be able to create a financial aid package for you. And the nice thing is, if you've applied to maybe 6 schools at first, you get accepted to those, and you're still looking at options, you can then go back to your FAFSA and add a different school to that. So you can even update that later on if you'd like to look into more opportunities.
And I'll just also make one note about the FAFSA. The first word of the FAFSA is free. So if you go to a website and it charges you to complete the FAFSA, get off of that one. There's another site that will help you fill out your FAFSA and they will charge you. That is not the right site. You want the one that says .gov, as in the government. So look for the FAFSA.gov. That's your federal form. That's the one you want to look for. That's free. And then also pay attention what other forms are needed by other schools. The profile, institutional specific forms, pay attention to what else they need and when. What other questions?
How about, so this one's timely in that parents are laid off due to COVID-19. How would they handle that, or how do they indicate that on a FAFSA?
Yeah, so especially since the FAFSA takes into consideration 2 years prior tax information, that wouldn't necessarily be shown on your FAFSA, but that doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities to look into for that. Many schools will do something called a professional judgment appeal, and you can reach out to your financial aid office about that. Some universities even have that directly on their financial aid tab on their website that you can click about it right on there. Other times it's a quick email to the financial aid office. Typically, if you explain your situation to them in a paragraph and just kind of explain what's gone on, especially with everything going on, I know that's the case for many families right now, they're able to then look into what additional documentation might be required to see if there's additional opportunities for you beyond what the FAFSA offered.
And I would add, use your admissions counselor as a resource as well, because oftentimes your admissions office might have 10 to 20 to 30 people who work in the office, because their job is to get connected and get to know you. But the financial aid staff might be 4 people or 5 people or 6 people who are handling the same questions from every family who's applying to their school and who's currently enrolled at their school. So sometimes you may not be able to get through that financial aid office phone, but you will be able to find your admissions officer, who oftentimes has a pipeline directly to financial aid. So definitely, if you're not able to talk to the financial aid office, connect with your admissions counselor. And that's why my sophomores and juniors who are in this conversation, getting to know your admissions counselor at that school is very, very important, because they can be your pipeline through the entire process, including financial aid.
Absolutely.
Here's one regarding homeschooling. What, if anything, are universities looking for in terms of homeschool curriculum description?
Yeah, and that definitely depends on the university. Many times, if they are having specific requirements, they'll outline that on their website, that maybe they're just looking for what's the name of the curriculum you're utilizing. Other times they might ask for samples of your work or course description, similar like a syllabus, that kind of thing. Other times they aren't requiring anything additional. So it really just depends on the university that you're looking into. But I typically, first thing that I would recommend is working on your homeschool transcript. PBA has a great homeschool page on their website that has a sample transcript for homeschool students. If you need help, there's a resource there. But then if you are looking at a university that requires additional course descriptions, typically you can even build that in as an attachment to your transcript, like a secondary page that outlines that per course. But Mary, are there other aspects that I didn't touch on that would be helpful for students with that?
No, that covers a lot of it. I mean, we do look for a recommendation letter. At Gettysburg, we require an additional recommendation letter that is not a family member. So that might be one of the only differences or exceptions, if you will. I do see a few other questions relating to FAFSA and applying for financial aid, and I think we can hit on those. I know we're right at almost the top of our 2 minutes. Scott to give us the cue there. But where do I apply for FAFSA? That's your FAFSA.gov. So looking for FAFSA.gov. When do you apply? October 1, it opens up. How do you submit it? Electronically. And what happens if you don't fill out the FAFSA? Well, nothing. But if you don't fill out the FAFSA and you are hoping to receive need-based financial aid, they can't give you anything. It is a federal mandate that we must have the FAFSA form in order to give need-based financial aid. Now, that doesn't have anything to do with scholarships, though. Oftentimes, your scholarships are completely separate. I work very closely with our Conservatory of Music, and we offer music scholarships that have nothing to do with the FAFSA. If any of you are bassoon players, give me a call. It's looking at all of those details through the process.
I've seen some students who hear FAFSA and think loans, and that is something that you might receive from the FAFSA. But if you don't plan on taking out loans, you'd rather avoid loans, I still recommend doing the FAFSA, at least for your first year, because each individual school that you send it to is going to look at that, and sometimes the financial aid packages can look vastly different. So even if you had one student who didn't receive aid from the FAFSA, for the second student, I would have them apply because your financial situation may have changed. They may be looking at different schools. And you know what? The worst case scenario is it just gives you loans, and that's tools in your tool belt that you can then say, I don't want to utilize that if you'd rather not, and that's okay. But it gives you the option if you do want to utilize that later on. So I definitely recommend doing that at least for your first year.
And with that, we will go ahead and have to conclude. I want to thank Emily and Mary for their most excellent presentation here. A ton of information, obviously. Just a reminder for all of you that you will be able to see the recording. If you missed anything, if you missed a website, then please, by the end of the day, the button that you selected to attend this session, it will become a link to the recording. Okay, so thank you once again for the presentation entitled Simplifying the College Preparation Process, a great session for, but not limited to, homeschoolers. And you can come back here, as I mentioned, anytime, as well as, and you have the contact information here for both Emily and Mary. I also want to remind you to explore your college options in our virtual college fair. We have hundreds of interactive virtual booths where you can watch videos, download materials, and even chat live with admissions representatives from that institution. You'll also find that some booths have a schedule of their own live stream video presentations. So make sure you visit that today or come back while the event is still live to enjoy these experiences. Thank you once again and have a great day. Take care all.
Thank you.
So good to meet you all. Glad you could join us.